I just saw Bone Temple and I realized that it is about weaponizing hope, filled with archetypes about fascism and the resistance of fascism. And so I thought we'd have a little talk about that. What do you say? In the last movie, at the very end of 28 years later, you meet the cult. It's Jimmy, and he's clearly an antichrist type character. He believes in old Nick, Satan, and that he's in charge and creating. You don't really get all of that. You get kind of like Teletubby cult or something, but they're very violent at the end of the last movie, and you're forced to just kind of question, like, is this better than the violence that the kid was running from? Little kid is rescued. Spoiler about the last film. I'm going to try to do this with as few spoilers as possible about my reading of Bone Temple. The cult at the end of it, it just seems like salvation. And I think that that tells you something. In the next film, it immediately switches to violence. It shows that how people don't get involved in cults because they want to be murderous bastards. They don't get involved with fascism because they want to be murderous bastards. They get involved for safety. They get involved for security. They get involved for all the reasons people get involved in gangs, right? They feel a sense of belonging. They feel a sense of identity. They get a new name. Words change meaning. And now these words, they all buy into this new meaning. And they believe in a new mythology. That's incredibly important because history cannot be allowed to be remembered. You must not remember history in order for the cult to take over, in order for fascism to win. They replace things like independent thought and critical thinking with ritual, obedience, belonging, certainty, and an explanation for your suffering. That's how Christianity and every other religion works. It explains, why are you suffering? Must be a reason for it. But they don't do it through cruelty in the beginning. It's always through a sense of relief, right? You're relieved that you found your tribe, and it seems like you're just a group that believes in salvation or something. But it turns out it's actually more about domination, and domination usually sneaks in wearing the clothes of safety and security. It doesn't come in screaming. It comes in promising peace. We see this with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is always promising peace. He's starting the board of peace, and he wants the peace prize. But what do you see? It's really just a culture of domination and conquest, and they'll switch back and forth all the time. Well, I want peace, but I also want to conquer these countries through intimidation, violence, or economic pressures or whatever. It's always about domination. That's what the cults do. That's what cults do. That's what fascists always do. The cult leader in this, he's clearly a fascist archetype. And I think it's hammered home later in the film, but he has a broken relationship with history. He can't totally be blamed because he was just a kid when the zombie apocalypse started. He was like 8 years old or something like that. And now we are 28 years later, so he's, 36 years old, and he doesn't remember history. He remembers the Teletubbies, and he remembers broken visions of the day the earth fell, the day society fell apart. And he doesn't understand the words, but so he invents new meanings for them. Charity becomes an act of ritual violence. Care is a way of enforcing hierarchy. Morality is actually just loyalty. Loyalty is the most important thing, of course, to the cult leader. But it shows how control always starts with changing the meanings of words, or inventing new meanings for words, or inventing new words. That happens too. But it's very, very clear what they're doing in the film, and I think it's pretty rad. But at the end of the day, violence is the real engine. Fear, punishment, ritualized brutality, and then your salvation that was promised the whole time is actually conditional. The condition is that you partake in the ritual violence, the brutality, and the loyalty. You do everything because well, the illusion of belonging is stripped away in the second film, where you're actually seeing it right up close, human on human violence that really wasn't present in the last film. You see this a lot in like zombie apocalypse movies, and they really pull it off because the violence is scary and interesting and weird. It's really good. I think the movie did a good job with this, but what it also shows is that the violence on the outside of the world, you see the zombies, they're ripping people's heads off, they're going crazy, they're so chaotic. And the zombies in the movie, the 28 Days and 28 Years Later films, they're always like really fast zombies. They've got like a rabies hybrid, a rabies virus. So their type of violence is chaos, but the cult, the fascist violence is orderly. They tie people up. They do the things that make violence orderly, so it doesn't seem chaos, and that's what you need in a world that is chaotic. And these kids involved in the cult, they accept it. Even though they're having misgivings, they accept it. And the film is just refusing to pretend there's any difference, which I think is fantastic, man. You see it again, you see the zombie movies all the time, how like, oh, we're actually just a danger. You see it in like the Walking Dead movies, right? We're actually a danger to ourselves, each other, more than the zombies are. But this, in 28 years later, Bone Temple, it actually shows you why and how. And it's really good. And it plays as a mirror for what's happening today, which is really good too. That's what horror movies are supposed to do, is try to make you think about today. At the end of the film, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but there's a character that comes back from the previous films, and they're talking about Winston Churchill. And it's in the Danny Boyle 28 years later, they even play, I think it's a Rudyard Kipling poem, Boots, Boots, Boots. They're even showing clips from the memories of the past. And here you hear about Winston Churchill, and they quote Winston Churchill, the famous quote about those who forget history are destined to repeat it, and how fascism falls. And they're out in the open talking about fascism at the end of the movie. And I don't think that's by accident, right? They're really invoking this, that forgetting is the danger, forgetting where we come from and becoming amnesiacs is the danger. And we see this like, oh, January 6th didn't happen now. January 6th was a day of love. You hear people all the time saying these things, especially about Donald Trump, because he's such a obvious cult leader. You hear people misrepresenting the past or simply forgetting it. And that's intentional. The Dromosphere is intentional. If you are swimming in the force of speed, and they're constantly bombarding you with new information, you have no way to process what's just happened. Like by the time Renee Good's body goes cold, Alex Preddy is on the floor. You know, and by the time that happens, we're bombing Iran again. Where the new Epstein files are coming out. You have constant flooding the zone with shit, as Stephen Bannon says. And Donald Trump is really good at it. Flood the zone with shit, keep you guessing, keep you on your toes. You won't be able to remember. But that misremembering is exactly what gives rise to fascism, what gives rise to cult-like behavior. Fascism depends on a curated memory. They determine what history was. That's why you see them erasing stories about slaves from the Smithsonian and from national parks. That's why Martin Luther King Jr. Day is no longer a holiday at national parks. These are important markers of our history, and if you erase that, then you can create mythology in its place. You hear about nativists, people like Nick Fuentes and these guys that think that, like, oh, if you're born here, we have a history. They don't want you to remember history. They have no interest in you having any idea of our history. What they want is mythology. And it's very difficult to know the difference sometimes because of the way Plato's cave is working, because you can only see what's being projected in front of you. You can't actually see what's behind you. But cults depend on sealed off memories, and liberation depends on a shared, contested remembrance. We have to always be asking authority what gives them the right to control us. And also, is that true what you're saying? Because I remember it differently. Always have to be resistant to all of that. Anyway, Bone Temple rejects the idea that authority saves us from violence and shows us that authority is just another form of violence, that violence is authority. It shows us that authority is basically stabilized violence. That's it. It's taking what's chaotic and making it stable, which will allow you to deal with it better. You'll be able to handle it more because of the orderly fashion in which violence is being presented, or which you're expected to carry it out on their behalf. But real resistance isn't about heroism or some kind of purity. And no one in these films are pure, but it's a refusal to surrender the meaning of our shared existence, which is really cool. And there's a little bit about how even the myths of the past have an agreed upon kind of structure, and even those can be bastardized. If the Christ story is corrupted, what can be done? And it shows that the cult of Satan cult, but even Satanists, what is Satanism? It's a misrepresentation of the biblical stories, of biblical myths, the Judeo-Christian tradition, and all of that. If you take all that and you misrepresent it, you get Satanism. And so even adhering to the word, the scripture, you could see that remembering the scripture for what it actually means and what it actually says could also be a way to fight the fascists, tear the fascists down, as Woody Guthrie said. Anyway, that's real resistance. It's not about heroism or purity, and they'll try to make it like that. In the real world, they'll say, well, what are you? Are you so pure? You're a hypocrite. Heroism, resistance is not about heroism or purity. It is, or never contradicting yourself or anything. It's about not surrendering the meaning of this. Anyway, the film asks this question, and if someone offers you salvation, are they offering you care or are they offering you control? And that, my friends, what a great question for a film to ask in 2026, at the end of the first month of 2026. What a great question to ask. If someone says, I am your salvation, I am your redemption, I am your retribution, if somebody says that, like Donald Trump did, you should immediately ask, are you offering those things, caring about me, or are you actually offering to control me? My name is Skyjack Morgan. I'm an independent news and culture commentator and free speech and critical thinking advocate. Thank you so much for joining me for this little literary review of The Bone Temple. Thank you. I appreciate you for being here.